and welcome to episode 39 of the Australian Roundtable Podcast on Sunday, the 5th of July, 2015. I'm your host, John LeBon, and I'm joined by Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here, Johnno.
And we're also fortunate enough to have again with us via Google Hangout our resident wise old elder, the Silver Fox himself, Lindsay. Thanks for being there.
Thank you.
Now, for new listeners, the ARP is a Brisbane-based independent news analysis discussion roundtable which broadcasts live every Sunday from about 3 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Live listeners can take part in a live chat forum at the YouTube channel during broadcasts, so hello to all the people who are already there. All episodes are archived at that channel and are also available in MP3 format for you to download from our website free of charge at ozroundtable.com. Views presented by individual panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel, and all important information cited during the broadcast will be linked to at our site ozroundtable.com so you can verify and analyse it for yourself, which we always recommend you do. Episodes generally run to about 2 hours, and I'll get to today's rundown right now. In the domestic section, we've got 5 segments today. The Queensland Supreme Court judges are on leave. Fairfax accesses more regional jobs. Human Rights Commissioner spends $70,000 of your money. Income tax in Australia, a feature piece from Lindsay. I'm looking forward to that. And financial advisor has been victimised for criticising a Jewish MP. That'll lead nicely into international. We've got another 5 segments there. And in order, a German opera conductor has been victimised for his alleged anti-Semitism. We'll also talk about how hate speech laws in America are being trumped. They're trumping, rather, the First Amendment. We'll take a look at the Greece referendum and certain media myths surrounding that. California's passed a very controversial vaccine bill, and in Denmark there's been some vaccine fallout. And if we get time, we'll also take a look at ISIS in Israel. So another packed show for today, boys. But we like to start off by having a general chat about how things have been. So I'll throw straight to you there, Lindsay. How have you been, my good man?
Yeah, very good, thanks. It's been a good week. Mum's in hospital, so I've sort of got the run of the house to myself. So, you know, except going and visiting her occasionally. But other than that, yeah, no, things are running all right. I'll leave that with you now.
All right then, and Ethan, it's been another big week. How have you been?
Yeah, it has been, Jono. I'm pretty good. It's good to be back on the show. I thought it was interesting that in the US right now it's the 4th of July, Independence Day, and even though what you may think of July 4th or what it means or what it stands for, what it symbolises, the meaning of independence is what this show is. So I thought it was pretty cool to be able to broadcast overseas on the 4th of July, Independence Day, an independent show, and it's going to be a good one, hopefully, Jono.
Very nice. Well, we like to start the show off also by taking a quick look at some of the more comical aspects of the mainstream media. And Lindsay, I know that you've found some news to do with ISIS and certain flags. Take it away.
Yeah, I have, thanks, yeah. This was in the Courier Mail on page 18 on the 29th of June, and it said CNN journo mistakes sex toy flag for ISIS emblem. And I'll quote, London, a CNN anchor mistook a flag with sex toys on it for a flag with terror group ISIS in a live cross on the Global News Network. The report came in as breaking news on CNN after it was spotted at a parade in London. Just in, ISIS flag spotted in gay pride parade, read a banner across the bottom of the news channel's TV feed. An ISIS flag among a sea of rainbow colours was spotted by a CNN international assignment editor. And that's the end of the quote there. Okay. The man was dressed in black and white and was waving what appeared to be a very bad mimicry, but a clear attempt to mimic the ISIS flag, Miss Paul, P-A-W-L-E, said, but it turned out the flag featured crude drawings of sex toys. So I think look, there's so many things in that says so much about our world on so many different levels that I think I'll just leave it up to the listeners to process that themselves. I'll hand back that to you now.
Lindsay, we'll talk more about that in the after show, but just quickly, I know you've got another article for us to do with ISIS once again, and this time not about their sex toy flags, but about them avoiding Israel. Take it away.
Yeah. Okay, this is on page 29 of the Courier Mail on the 3rd of July, and the headline said, scores die as jihadis hit Egypt. And quote, Cairo, dozens of people have been killed in a wave of unprecedented attacks by ISIS on Egyptian soldiers in the Sinai Peninsula in a major challenge to President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. And that's the end of the quote. And my comment straight up, as soon as I saw this, I thought, what happened to Israel? You know, these blokes went from Syria and Iraq to Egypt without passing go. Just how credulous do these people think we are? They expect us to keep reading this rubbish without asking any questions. It just flabbergasted me when I read that. Anyway, that'll do me. I'll hand it back to you, blokes, and see what you've got to say about it.
Let's go to Ethan.
Well, Lindsay, we've brought this up on the show before, and you're absolutely right. You know, if ISIS were as depraved as they are now, obviously going into the sex toy industry, as we've been alerted that they're trying to take over. If they were as big, as bad, as evil as everyone liked to tell us, why aren't they going for Israel? Why aren't they going for all of these pipelines? And it's right in the middle of this strategic standpoint where these so-called extremists are taking over, yet they never go to Israel. And that's one question. You know, I'd like to say that they do go to Israel. It's in the studios where they do some of these videos that they release, but that's just my personal opinion. But the thing that gets me is the mainstream media can release rubbish like this every single week, and there's no repercussions for when they're discovered that they're lying to us. There's no repercussions for them not following code of ethics here in this country. There are code of ethics in this country. You can get in trouble if you do some of these things, but they're not going to get in trouble because when it becomes institutionalized and becomes a collective thing, that's when it starts to become normalized, and that's the real problem we have to address here on this show, Johnno.
Certainly is. Well, we like to start the show off looking at some of these more comical articles. They're comical to us, of course. To many people, ISIS is a very real thing. It's a very real threat. Their civil liberties should be taken away to protect them from this very real threat, rather. But to us, it's all a bit of a laugh, and that's why we talk about it. But we have to get into the domestic segment proper. And Lindsay, you've got something for us about the Queensland Supreme Court judges all being on leave.
Yes, I have. This was on page 1. So this is the front page and a huge photograph of one of the judges. And it was on the 3rd of July. The headline said, "Court out. Top judges on leave as crisis over Carmody rocks judiciary." And for people who don't live here, Carmody was the Chief Justice who was appointed by the previous government, and then the other judges refused to sit with him, and it was a big kerfuffle over that. But anyway, I'll read the quote from the article. All but 4 of the state's 27 Supreme Court judges are on leave as the judiciary confronts its biggest crisis in decades. Despite the unprecedented resignation of Chief Justice Tim Carmody throwing the state's highest court into turmoil, even acting Chief Justice Hugh Fraser is now enjoying a winter break. Several of them are overseas on trips funded by their travel allowances, including the President of the Court of Appeal, Margaret McMurdo, who had refused to sit on any court with Justice Carmody. And can I just add, that's the end of the quote, but can I add there, somewhere else in the article, they were talking about their travel allowances being $35,000 a year each. So that puts it into some sort of perspective. Anyway, I'll just see what Ethan has to say about that first.
Well, it's interesting, Lindsay. I'd like to know personally, you know, what this could mean. You know, it seems like that they're setting up for something. You know, I don't think that it's completely a coincidence that all of this sort of nonsense is happening at the same time, in my personal opinion. But I don't know. I can't speculate on this. But again, it just shows you the outrageous expenses that some of these people have, where in many cases you can see they're not acting out of the interests of the people. They're not acting, you know. Tim's a perfect example of that with the Heiner affair. You know, the Heiner affair got completely thrown out after, you know, all the evidence suggested the contrary, got completely thrown out. And these are the people that are taking taxpayer-funded expenses and are just going overseas and are leaving and just leaving the Supreme Court in shambles, which is supposed to be our most respected, you know, court and legal process in the country, Johnno.
Look, I'm no law-talking guy, but I read this article in Lindsay's agenda this morning, and it says all but 4 of the state's 27 Supreme Court judges are on leave. So there's 27 Supreme Court judges, and 23 of them are on leave. To me, this is incredible. I find it hard to believe, but it's right there. It's in the mainstream media. This is the official story of what's going on. If people, I mean, that alone should be enough for people to realise that our justice system isn't quite what they want us to believe. And I found that one fascinating, Lindsay. But we have to press on. We've got a big show today, so final thoughts, and then we'll move on to topic 2.
Yeah. The only thought I've got, I've spoken about this in the past. I've got a real reservation about these judges, but it's not the time and the place. We can talk about it some other time. I think I'll leave it at that.
All right, then. Well, let's move on to topic 2 for domestic today. The Human Rights Commissioner spends $70,000, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno. And this relates perfectly to what we were just discussing about expenses and people in positions of authority using our money to do as they please. Now, originally, I was going to do a massive feature piece just on Abbott and the whole citizenship nonsense, but I didn't get that together as I wanted. So I've thrown in a couple of little discussion points here. And this one I've put here is everyday Australians continue to struggle with the increased cost of living, which we see all through the media this week. Our political heroes and saviours are once again giving us great hope and inspiration to aspire to be just like them when we grow up. This time it's not Joe Hockey, but rather the Human Rights Commissioner, Tim Wilson. Now, I've got an article here from the Sydney Morning Herald that I'm going to read out from this morning. It was published this morning, entitled, Tony Abbott's human rights man, Tim Wilson, racks up $77,000 in expenses. Quote, Tony Abbott's hand-picked human rights advisor ran up more than $77,000 in taxpayer-funded expenses in his first year on the job, spending almost $15,000 on taxis. The government appointed Tim Wilson to the role of Human Rights Commissioner shortly after the 2013 election, drafting him from the Institute of Public Affairs, a right-wing think tank. In the 12 months after he took up the position in February 2014, the former Liberal Party member charged taxpayers $77,763 for expenses. These were in additional to his $332,000 salary package and $40,000 accommodation allowance. He spent $14,562 on cab fares, including almost $3,000 for family reunion travel for his partner, according to departmental response to Labor question on notice. Mr. Wilson also claimed for an iPhone, an iPad, a laptop, and a $1,400 standing desk. The so-called Freedom Commissioner, as he's referred to, has roamed far and wide in his job. He has spent about $11,000 on business class airfares abroad, although about $2,000 of his $2,000 of this was reimbursed to the groups that hosted him, and $26,000 on domestic fares, including $10,800 for his partner. And you know what his response to all of this was? This is the part that gets me. He said, "You'd rather I sit in my office all day," was Mr. Wilson's response when contacted. The Australian Human Rights Commission declined to supply details of other commissioners' expenses to see if they were comparable to Mr. Wilson's, by stating the travel expenses of commissioners are proportionate to the work required to fulfil their statutory obligations, end quote. I mean, Lindsay, you got to help me out here, mate. There's an overwhelming dislike of things like this in our country. People just generally don't like greedy politicians that are spending their money, and even someone as our Human Rights Commissioner doing this is spending over $70,000 on top of his $300,000 a year salary. I mean, what I want to ask you is, when are people going to stand up and tell them that we've had enough? When do we get to the line in the sand with this? People are already fed up. What is it going to take for people to say we're not going to take this anymore?
I really don't know. This is, as a personal thing, I really detest these people. That it just seems like there's just so many of these things going on, so many of these, what would you call them, quangos or whatever you like to call them, semi-government authorities, and they're all sucking the money out of the taxpayer. We're all doing it hard. We're finding it difficult to pay taxes. They keep putting everything imaginable up, electricity, mail, stamp on mail. It just, everything just keeps going up all the time while these people are sucking the whole system dry. And I agree with you. I don't know what it's going to take. I really don't, because our politicians don't seem to be sensitive to our feelings on this. They keep producing more of these damn things. That's what gets me. I'm not sure what we do about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, you make a good point, and this isn't just the first precedent of this. We've seen all through the media about Joe Hockey's travel expenses all across the country. He's hundreds of thousands of dollars in expenses he's spending with our money that he's spending. We saw the ludicrous expense of the G20 summit here in Brisbane, which we covered here on the Australian Roundtable. Defence spending, political perks that we mentioned a couple of weeks ago on the show. Where does this end? And now to add insult to injury, Jono, we're seeing someone who has the title Freedom Commissioner. He actually has Freedom Commissioner using taxpayer slave money to fund his expenses. It's ludicrous stuff.
Mate, it gets even better than that. For the international listeners who aren't aware, we have a Human Rights Commissioner here in Australia, and Tim Wilson has been in charge of that post since 2014. Let me read to you the official story about Tim Wilson from Wikipedia, which is where you'll get the most official of official stories. Tim Wilson is a public policy analyst and commentator who has been the Australian Human Rights Commissioner since 2014. He was a policy director of the Institute of Public Affairs for 7 years. We'll come back to that in a moment. On appointment to the Human Rights Commission, he resigned his membership of the Liberal Party of Australia. That's the party who appointed him as a Human Rights Commissioner. It gets better. He has a Bachelor of Arts and Masters of Diplomacy from Monash University. I am also an alumnus of Monash University. In 2008, Wilson, then a Liberal Party member, I'm embarrassed by that, is why I bring that up, ran for position of the Deputy Mayor of the City of Melbourne beside Peter McMullen, a former Labor Mayor of Geelong. Allegations of threats and bullying marred the campaign. Wilson is openly gay and is an advocate for same-sex marriage. And then you can read the rest of that from there. All links provided at ausroundtable.com. But the reason why I bring all this up is he was actually a member of the very party who installed him as the Human Rights Commissioner. Before he was installed, he only resigned his membership of that party because it would be a conflict of interest if he maintained it. And he's openly gay, which is a nice little out for the Liberal Party, they can't afford to not seem progressive enough. So to have an openly gay member appointed by them to the Human Rights Commission makes them look good. The only issue is the guy's spending $70,000 just on regular expenses when the average person in Australia earns that amount of money or less. This stuff is absurd, and we don't spend much time on this show talking about the political system because most of us and most of our listeners, we're well aware that the political system as it stands is just a circus. But every now and then, Ethan, it is worth just talking about the fact that this is a circus and your money's paying for it.
It certainly is worth talking about it, Jono. You made good points there. Looking at the background of this people, he Institute of Public Affairs. While he was in the Institute of Public Affairs, I wrote about this on tottnews.com when he was appointed as a Human Rights Commissioner. He called for the Human Rights Commission to be abolished before he became the Human Rights Commissioner. He said that it's irrelevant, it's useless. Here's someone who detests human rights, who is spending our money, and he has campaigned for the likes of people that question World War II history, for the laws to be tightened around them, for free speech to be tightened. This is someone who does not have the best interests of the people at hand. So I guess if I had a final thought to leave people with is I brought this article up just to remind the listeners that the government, it's not your friend. Look at what they're doing to us as a collective. Look at what they're doing to us as individuals, and understand that the system is a sham. And if you're a new listener, as I know we do have a couple that are joining us this week, if you're someone who believes in the parties rather than the individuals or vice versa, hopefully you can identify the problem here with these things that we're talking about, because they're not out to serve the best interests of the people, Jono.
No, they certainly aren't. And in the live chat, we've got about 50 people watching right now. Oz Storm says that the thieving bastards rave on about dole bludgers being bad for Australia. Poof. And of course, that's what's going on here, isn't it? We're constantly told that the people who are unemployed and are receiving, $300 a week in welfare benefits, they're the problem facing Australia. Our supposed Human Rights Commissioner is spending $70,000 just on his expenses. That's not his income. He gets paid a certain amount. These are the expenses on top of that, and he's supposed to be here to look out for your human rights. If you still believe the system is here to help you, I'm not sure what it's going to take for you to realise that that's simply not the case. But Ethan, we need to move on, and this is another one of yours. Fairfax axing more regional reporters, and we should state at the outset that in Australia we have something between a monopoly and a duopoly in our mainstream media, at least when it comes to newspapers. News Corp, Rupert Murdoch's company, controls something like 65% to 70% of newspaper circulation. Fairfax are responsible for most of the rest. So it's something between a monopoly and a duopoly. So Fairfax are the number 2 in this system, and they're actually more regional reporters. Ethan, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. This is only a quick one for the week, but I noticed this on the ABC website, and I thought I'd bring it up on the show just to share my thoughts about what's happening now. I've got an article in front of me entitled "Fairfax Cuts Jobs from Country Papers in Regional South Australia" from the 2nd of July 2015. Quote, "Fairfax Media has announced a shake-up of its South Australian country operations with the loss of about 35 jobs and the closure of one newspaper. Staff across regional areas were briefed on Thursday and the proposed changes to 18 publications. Fairfax said that there would be voluntary redundancies of about 35 full-time equivalent positions, including about 22 editorial roles. The company said the plan was part of an 18-month overhaul of its community media division and that it would invest in new digital-first publishing systems to redesign its newspapers. The Roxby Downs Suns will be discontinued, while another publication down south there, I can't pronounce that, it will be published once a week instead of twice a week, and the publications that will be affected include the Stock Journal, the Port Lincoln Times, the Transcontinental at Port Augusta, the Times of Victor Harbour, the Barossa and Light Herald. There's a massive list of newspapers that are essentially going to be either cut or minimised down or turned to digital in here. And under the proposal, Fairfax also plans to close a commercial printing business in Bordertown, and this is on top of the 120 jobs from papers in regional Victoria and New South Wales that they have cut, end quote there. But for me, especially having experience in rural regions of reporting and having worked with people that hold this issue close to their heart, even though these regional newspapers are owned by either Murdoch or Fairfax, in these local regional areas, they are still very much local independent sources of news about what's going on in those towns. So it's sad to see this happening because we know there is solutions to the question of the newspaper and whether it's dying, etc. And the second point I wanted to grab, and the reason I brought this up, Jono, was the second point was that with Facebook looking to control the flow of news and information, with the group of companies like Viacom expanding even further, and as you mentioned, Jono, with such things as these media reform laws that are coming in to expand the powers, expand the reach of the media, it seems like the diversity in news and how we receive it is being eroded fairly quickly, and this is just another example of that.
Well, I mean, why would you need to employ journalists on the ground when so much of what you publish is just reproduced from AP or AAP or Reuters or whatever? They don't really need workers on the ground because they're not publishing what these guys are writing in the first place. They're just reprinting what they're told to reprint, and that's why you get the same articles all over the world. That's why in Australia, Canada, Britain, New Zealand, and many other countries, we're all getting the same stories about ISIS, the boogeyman, or what have you, because the newspapers are just republishing the same stuff from a central outlet. And I think right now is not a good time. If you are studying journalism or you want to be a journalist, I think it's very admirable that you want to do that because you've probably got good reasons for wanting to do it, but you probably haven't understood what the mainstream media exists to do, and it doesn't exist to give the people the truth. Lindsay, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that. I find that when I go looking for stories, I'll see something in the Courier Mail and I'll go searching for something online, and you see the same story all around the world. You might have 4 or 5 pages of Google searches on that same quote that you put in there from all around the world, and it makes it quite clear that the whole thing is a controlled system. It's quite interesting when you do it. The other thing too is I think this says big heaps about what's going to happen in newspapers. So it's a double-edged sword. I know we're going to have less local content, but I'm hoping that some of these major newspaper proprietors will get shaken up quite a lot, because I think they've had it too good for too long, and they've really been sticking it to us. I mean, they're shameless in the way they present propaganda, and I think that it's like a comeuppance. I think it's a good thing in some ways that they're going to feel it. It's not going to be nice for the journalists who are losing their jobs or whatever. I can understand that, but it had to change sooner or later. We're just saying we want to sack all these bludgers in the government, and I think the same thing happened to happen here. You can only go on screwing people for so long, and they have a gutful, and they toss you out. So that's about all I've got to comment on.
Well, you make a good point there, Lindsay. For me, it is those two different perspectives on this. On one hand, it is good that whatever the perception may be that newspapers are losing their publications or whatever, that it's a result of the people becoming fed up with them and whatnot. For me, I see this as a combination of both of the things we're talking about. One, it is the way for the Associated Press to continue to just to just control every form of information, to have the same news regurgitated everywhere. And the way that they're doing this, unfortunately, is through these regional communities where, if you still look at the newspapers out there, they may regurgitate the same mainstream audience, but they're talking about what matters on the ground in those towns, and that's what's important. You need grassroots newspapers. You need regional newspapers in countries, because that's what keeps news alive, because people can relate, people can spread it, and if anything happens, there's local news to then to tell them what's happening and come together as a community on a grassroots level. And this is what I think they're trying to do both. They're trying to erode this grassroots level, Jono, but at the same time also reinforce their monopolized media and flow of information. So it's a double thing, and it's very concerning. So I just wanted to bring this up just to help people understand that support your local paper if you're out in a regional area listening to this, or form your own local paper out in these areas, because the more that they erode this, the more power the major ones have, and that's something we don't want, Jono.
Yeah, I think more and more people are starting to understand the mainstream media isn't there to help them. There's still a large group of people who do believe that the mainstream media is here to inform them, and unfortunately they'll probably always exist. But I think more and more people are starting to realize that the mainstream media isn't there to assist them. It's interesting to me when I ask people about these things, just out on the street, out on the ground, when I just poll regular people about their thoughts on things, I have people tell me, well, the mainstream media has to tell us the truth, because if they didn't, then somebody else would, and they would lose readership, they'd lose money. They've got this idea that the mainstream media exists to make money. And then when you point out to them that News Corp's flagship newspaper, The Australian, loses money every year, they haven't got a response to you. It's just that their eyes glaze over, they've got no response, they haven't really thought this through. The mainstream media isn't used simply to make money. It's used for power, it's used to project power, it's used to accumulate and agglomerate power. Conglomerate power, that's what it does, and it does that by molding the minds of the masses. And I think if our schools really existed to make us smarter people, to help us improve our ability to process the information that we get, we would learn at a young age to be very critical of the mainstream media and to never accept anything they say just because of the fact that they're saying it. But a lot of people to this day still believe in the mainstream media. They still want to believe that if they watch the 6 p.m. news every night, that they'll be informed of the things they need to know. And it's, as you guys know, as many of our listeners know, if you're talking to someone who's in that mindset that the news will tell me what I need to know, it's hard to break that. But there is hope, because like I said, I see more and more people starting to realize, hold on, the mainstream media isn't here for us. We need to move on to the fourth topic, and this is a big feature piece, Lindsay. This is to do with income tax in Australia. Now, we touched on this topic on last week's show, so this makes a nice little follow-up, if you like. You've got some information for us about income tax, how it came to be. This is your piece. Take it away. Okay,
thank you for that. Yeah, we were talking about bracket creep last week, and we were saying how insidious it is, because of inflation, people keep getting pushed up into a higher tax rate all the time, so that even though, well, it's common sense, as inflation comes, we're having to pay more and more and more for the same things. You buy a loaf of bread, it's costing you 3 or 4 times what it did 20 years ago. So you're no better off because you're getting a lot of money, but it's putting you into a higher tax bracket, so you're paying more and more, a bigger percentage of your income in tax. So I went in and I found some articles that I'd had from nearly 20 years ago, and one of them, well, I'll just start reading through the thing. That's the easiest way. 5 of the 10 planks stated in the Communist Manifesto relating to the confiscation of money and property are: 1, abolition of private property and the application of all rents of land to public purposes. Number 2 is a heavy, progressive or graduated income tax. Number 3 is abolition of all rights of inheritance. 4 is a confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. And 5 is the centralisation of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. a bit like the reserve banks or whatever. Okay, the second plank above is the one a heavy progressive or graduated income tax, is the one which most interests us in this discussion, which comes on the heels of last week's discussion on bracket creep of Australians' income tax. As an aside, most of the planks of the Communist Manifesto have now been implemented in Western nations since at least a century ago. In the interim, our fathers and brothers have been spilling their blood and surrendering our freedoms in wars such as Korea and Vietnam, supposedly against communism, and then later on defending communism against Germany in World War I and World War II. When one considers that communism was funded and Lenin was sent to Russia by the likes of the Wall Street bankers and the European bankers, as outlined in Anthony Sutton's Wall Street and Bolshevik Revolution, most Western countries have been communist, in fact, at a springboard for communism into Russia for at least a century. A link will be made available to this book by Anthony Sutton on the Aus Roundtable website. I mention this connection to communism in the introduction to draw your attention to passages I intend to read from the second reading speech for the introduction of Income Tax Assessment Bill in 1915 by Mr. Hughes. He was the Attorney General at the time. I've since looked it up, and that's Billy Hughes. Many people have heard his name. In 1913, the 16th Amendment to the US Constitution made the income tax a permanent fixture to the US tax system, and the Federal Reserve was created. So keep that in mind. That was not 1913. Another plank of the Communist Manifesto was the likes of the Federal Reserve, which is a central bank. Now, also, please note that this is like a coincidence that we should suddenly decide to create an income tax here in Australia less than 2 years later, after it happened in the US. I'm going to read from the speech in Parliament by Billy Hughes. And he says, quote, "In introducing the measure, it is proper that I should refer to the circumstances responsible for its introduction and the principle upon which all sound schemes of taxation must rest, that additional revenue is necessary to meet the great and growing liabilities created by the war," that's the First World War, is amply apparent, and the government has decided that this be best raised by an income tax. So my comment on that was, it was needed to finance the war, despite us being told that the First World War had been financed by the original Commonwealth Bank at the cost of administering the loans. That's what we were told. Anyway, I won't go on too much about that. So my second point about that is, well, if it was only for the war, why wasn't income tax retired after the First World War? I'll continue with what the quote from Billy Hughes. He says, quote, "But I have always regarded this form of direct taxation as peculiarly appropriate in the circumstances of a moderate community. And if the incidence of the tax be based upon sound principles, not only an effective means of raising money for the conduct of government, but serving as an instrument of social reform." So he says that in his second reading speech. So please note that income tax was also intended as an instrument of social reform. Quote, "In imposing taxation, it is necessary to consider not merely the requirements of the revenue, but also the incidence of the tax, so that economic equilibrium may be disturbed as little as possible. But to tax the surplus wealth affects merely the margin available for luxuries, and so leaves the nation's power of productivity unimpaired. It is this margin that economy ought to and must apply at the present time. One of the basic principles of this bill, then, is the taxation of surplus wealth as distinguished from capital." Now, my comment on that is, so if this principle is correct, why do we now have a capital gains tax? And do you feel that 30% and more of your income paid in income tax is surplus to the requirements that you could only be that you can only describe as surplus wealth. And if this is the case, is this why your wife is now out working and not looking after the children at home? There's just too many discrepancies here. Okay, I'll finish his second reading speech. Billy Hughes says, if this were a light income tax, we might follow the practice usual in the various states of imposing a flat rate on companies and treating them as individuals. But this is a graduated tax. And if you remember back to the Communist Manifesto, distinguishing between incomes in such a way that the rate of small incomes is very much less than the rate of large incomes. The rate of tax increases as it proceeds, even upon an even scale of graduation, so that an additional $1 of taxable income brings a higher rate of tax than that which precedes it. And he further then says, the bill, of course, is frankly a war measure. He's very specific there, designed to meet the present circumstances. It calls those who have the means to pay according to their means. No doubt the bill touches the high water mark of income taxation, but it does not do so without ample warrant. Now, please note that that is also a communist reference when they talk about those who pay according to their means. This usually accompanies the rest of the sentence, which is, and those who receive according to their needs. Now, I would like to have read the whole of this speech, but it just goes on forever, and I think the snippets that I've given will be sufficient insight of what was going on in 1913. Now, there's so much more that could be given, and I'm prepared to do that in the future if people are interested. There are documents I can read on taxation as a tool of economic and social policy. What is income? A human being's rights and obligations under the Taxation Act. The definition of person, and are human beings persons? We may also discuss doing freedom of information requests to the ATO in the future. So that's the end of it for today. I'll just see what you fellas have got to discuss about this. If, like, I having read it over the last week, I'm sort of probably not clear on whether what I've said has made it clear to you. That's what I'm concerned about. So could you give me a bit of feedback on what you got out of that?
Well, I'll chime in first there, Lindsay. Again, all of the links will be provided at ausroundtable.com. That's AUSroundtable.com. People can check this for themselves. But what you've basically done there in the last 3 or 4 minutes is show how the very words of people like Hughes himself match up perfectly with the Communist Manifesto. And I think the point that you're making here is that if you look at our taxation system today, you look at the Communist Manifesto, you'll see that the two aren't very dissimilar at all. And the reason for that is because when income tax was first introduced in the United States in 1913, in Australia within a couple of years of that, at first it was just a small impost on the average person, but over time we've got to the stage now where the average person, I think in Australia the average income for a full-time worker is something close to $70,000 a year. You look at the amount of money that they pay just in income tax, without even looking at other taxes, you can see that it's only taken 100 years and we've gone from no income tax to it taking out a third, and with other taxes as well, close to a half of what you earn. And it seems normal to us because we've grown up with that, but it's not normal. It matches perfectly with the Communist Manifesto. Ethan, what say you?
Yeah, you're completely right, Johnno, and that's the thing. It's been normalised to generations such as yourself and I, but for Lindsay's generation and for people that have lived through this development, you know, as he points out with what he just read out, this was introduced as it's there plain in text as quotes. It was introduced as a way of social reform. There was a whole bunch of underlying mechanisms behind it. It wasn't just as a way to fund the war, to do all of these things. And Lindsay makes a perfect example when he was speaking about the relations to communism and what communism is. You know, we've spent so long through Vietnam, through the Cold War, trying to fight against communism, trying to fight against this ideology of a big bad communist takeover, when if you read the Communist Manifesto, there has been subversive communism all throughout our Western world, all throughout our societies for almost a century. Everything that is pointed out there, whether in terms of income tax as this example, but in other forms of areas that you can see, it has always been here. So it's like we're fighting for freedom, to protect our freedom when we're actually slaves. You know, there's an oxymoron going here. We were trying to stop communism when it was creeping inside of us all along. So I thank Lindsay for bringing up that point there, and I look forward to expanding more and doing my own research on it too, because some of those quotes did blow me away there, and I look forward to expanding on this more, because it needs to happen, you know. And I know a little plug to the Know Your Rights program on radfm.com every Tuesday. They speak about tax being voluntary. They speak about all these things. There's plenty of people across the country that speak about tax being voluntary and ways to beat this. So I look forward to expanding on it more and looking for solutions in the future, Johnno.
Yeah, and again, like we always say, the links are provided at ausroundtable.com. Nobody should listen to us and think that they're getting the truth or all of the truth or anything like that. People have to do their own research. Most of our listeners know that. They do their own research. And for me, I found it particularly fascinating doing my own research into what happened in 1913. Of course, in 1913 in the US, they passed the legislation that allowed them to create what we now call the Federal Reserve, and they passed the bill for income tax in the same year. Now, if you think that's a coincidence, then good luck to you. But here we are 100 years later, and most people today, especially younger people, tax to them is just a normal thing. It's just part of life. You earn your money, you pay your tax. That's just how it is. It's very hard for the average person to understand this isn't how it's always been. And what's more, it is getting worse. And last week when Lindsay and I were doing the ARP, we talked about bracket creep, how over time, if the gradation of income tax levels don't change, so, you know, for the first 20 grand you pay so much tax, for the next 50 grand you pay so much tax, and so forth. If that doesn't change every year, then because people's incomes are slowly going up with inflation, which is a whole other topic, without getting into that, people's incomes slowly go up, then people will move into higher tax brackets. They're going to pay more tax just as a matter of course. And the average person has been conditioned to accept this. And when you're surrounded by people who accept it, there's a very good chance that you're going to accept it. But what people have to understand is that it hasn't always been this way, which means that government can function without it being this way. And I think once people get their heads around this, then they can start to consider why it's like this, who's benefiting from it being like this. And then when you see the similarities to the Communist Manifesto written well over 100 years ago, you start to see what's going on, Lindsay.
Yeah, no, I agree. And can I just mention, this is off topic, but maybe 20 years ago, they had a painters and dockers Royal Commission, and I remember getting the transcript from that, and it just intrigued me that the one thing that came out of that was that we've all got to have an identification, 10 points or whatever, if we want to open a bank account. And it just so happened that happened all around the world at the same time. And I'm looking at this and I thought, was this painters and dockers inquiry really an inquiry about painters and dockers, or was this just an excuse, or you use the word segue, into bringing in the banking identification? And that it ties in with what we were just talking about the Federal Reserve. They get the Federal Reserve comes in, the income tax that comes in America, we get it here. The next thing you know, we've got a central bank. It just goes on and on. And we've spoken about this before, about how our Prime Minister and the Canadian Prime Minister both give identical speeches, and anybody who can deny that there's some sort of coordination going on throughout the Western world are off their tree. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's fair enough, mate. Well, for international listeners and even for Australian listeners, I mean, I put to you that if you spoke to the average Aussie on the street and asked them, how does the income tax in Australia work? What are the different tax scales? I put to you that most people probably couldn't tell you the answer. So let me tell you what the income tax rates are for financial years 2012-13, 13-14, 14-15. For the first $18,000, you don't pay any tax. Between $18,000 and $37,000, this is in Australia obviously, it's 19 cents per dollar. Between $37,000 and $80,000, it's 32.5 cents for every dollar. between 80,000 and 180,000, it's 37 cents per dollar. Above $180,000 a year, it's 45 cents per dollar. So by the time you get to the top tax bracket, you're literally paying 45 cents for every dollar that you earn above 180. That's very close to half. And I've heard people saying how they don't mind. They think it's okay that people who earn that much should pay that much tax because, hey, they're rich already. They don't need more money. But the point is, hey, hold on a second. Those people earning that money, they're not your enemy. Why do you support the government taking almost half of what they earn above a certain amount? This is madness. But what they've managed to do is to convince the average person, hey, you're only on 50, 60, 70 grand a year. It's okay if we take money from all the people who are wealthier or better off. And if you get it in your mind that that's okay, if you side with the government stealing someone else's money over your fellow man, then the government has already won. And I'm using the government in a very loose term here. I prefer the term authorities. If the authorities, the people who really run the show, through the government, through the media, through education, through whatever, if they can convince you that it's okay for a centralized authority to take almost half of every dollar that your fellow man is earning, if they can convince you that that somehow helps you, then they've won psychologically. They've defeated you and they've split us up. I earn far less than a person on $180,000 a year, but my logic is if he's earning the money, that's his money. If she's earning the money, that's her money. Who the hell is the government to come along and say, we're taking 45 cents out of the dollar? If you accept this, you have been defeated psychologically, Ethan.
John, I couldn't have said it better, my friend. Yep.
I don't earn that kind of money. Like I choose to work enough to pay for what I need to pay for. That's what I do. But if someone else decides to spend their whole life working, if they think they were put on this earth to work and to earn money, that's their choice. What right does anyone have to come along and take 45 cents in the dollar, Lindsay?
Yeah, I agree entirely with you as well. This has been my thing for a long time, and it irritates me when I talk to people who believe this because quite often they have this like an envy, resentment thing going on in their brain, and you say, no, get out of that. You know, just look at it from your point of view. Why don't you go out and do it? Instead of being envious of these people, why don't you do it if that's what you feel? So, yeah, anyway, I would. You blokes have said it a lot better than I can say it, so that'll do for me. Thanks.
Well, again, Lindsay, all of the links will be available on AusRoundtable.com. You provided some quotes from Hansard. Hansard is the record of what is said in Parliament. So people can check out Hugh's comments for themselves. They can also check a link that will provide to the Communist Manifesto. Many people to this day have never even looked at the Communist Manifesto. They don't understand what's written in it. There's a good reason for that, because if at school they showed you the Communist Manifesto, there's a very high chance that you'd read it and you realise, hold on, this is very similar to how things are today. And then you might put two and two together. That's why most people haven't seen it. So we'll provide links to all of this on AusRoundtable.com, and we strongly recommend that people check out the links for themselves, and as always, do their own research. Don't trust me, don't trust Lindsay, don't trust Ethan, don't trust us for your info, don't trust the 6 p.m. news for your info, don't trust anyone for your info. Go to the primary source documents, go to Hansard, go to the Communist Manifesto, look at it for yourself, see if you can find similarities, and if you can, then you'll start to get an idea of what's going on today. We need to move on to the fifth and final topic for domestic, and Lindsay, this is to do with a financial advisor who's been victimised here in Australia for criticising a Jewish MP.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I got this from the Daily Mail in Australia. That the headline said, financial advisor who called MP Josh Freudenberg, F-R-Y-D-E-N Berg, a tinkering Jew, loses his professional license over his anti-Semitic Twitter tirade. And that was on the 30th of June. The quote is, Mr. Howarth, who is the principal of Retirement Wealth Advisors, targeted the MP on Sunday for his support over proposed changes to cut upfront commissions for financial advisors. Get your Josh Freudenberg Central Planning Jew punching bag, AB. I ordered 5,000 in on the next cargo flight out of Shenzhen, Mr. Howarth said in a tweet on Sunday, which has since been removed. Josh Freudenberg, Central Planning Jew or free market thinker. His tendencies towards communism will need to be watched, Mr. Howarth also wrote on Sunday. His tirade continued on Monday when Mr. Freudenberg was again called a Jew and subject to a series of other insults. My goodness. The I think that stood for fucking, but anyway, the F Freudenberg movement is picking up steam, Mr. Howarth tweeted. First course of action was to regulate insurance salaries. Slapstick comedy Jew. He's really going for it. He posted in another on Monday. Mr. Howard has since apologised. That's alarming. Yeah, and said he was shocked that his comments were inadvertently taken as anti-Semitism. I am honestly very sorry if anyone in the Jewish movement was offended, he told the Courier Mail. Okay, well, my comment on this was, well, it's all good so far. Apparently calling a Jew is one of other insults, apparently. So I don't know how you work that one out. I'll have to be careful when I talk about Rupert in future too, otherwise they might revoke my licence to speak, or I'm not quite sure what they'll do. Strike me off the electoral roll if I was on it. I don't know. Anyway, they'll think of something anyway. So I've got to be careful about calling people a Jew, apparently. But seriously, Mr. Howarth, why do you want to do a Mel Gibson? If you think that you told the truth in the first place, it makes you look weak and stupid when you retract your truth under Jewish pressure. And I think that's the main point I wanted to come out of this. If you're going to say these things, say them and stick by them. If they're not true, don't say them. If they are true, stick by them. Okay, that'll do me, and I'll throw it to you, Ethan, and see if you've got a comment on this.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I think that the way that you ended it just then summed up my thoughts exactly. You know what I mean? For the situation in general about whether he was crossing a line into the balance between free speech and attacking someone, you know, I'll have to go look at the tweets myself and do a bit more research into it. You know, it wasn't just him calling him a Jew, you know, he was attacking the man, you know, so I would have to do my own research. But I'm someone who, when anyone gets criticised for expressing their right or their freedom to say what they want, when anyone gets attacked for that, that's when I come into the picture. You know, that's where I get offended, and that's where I like to speak up against it. So the way that you ended it there, Lindsay, by saying if you want to say something, stick by it, don't buckle under the pressure of these things, is absolutely right. You know, I will stand vigorously by my statements that I make. I'm sure other people that I know will do the same. And regardless of whether he was in the wrong or not, if you're trying to have freedom of expression and you're not standing by that, then that's something that needs to be addressed, because the more that we buckle under the pressure to freedom of expression being taken away from us, eroded on a daily basis, the more susceptible we are to becoming outlawed and becoming prosecuted and put in prison for these sort of things. So what we need to do is we need to stand united. And I'm not speaking about him specifically, I'm just speaking about in general. Stand united, because free speech, as I've said before on the show, it transcends laws, it transcends what people can say. You know, they're just words of the English language. It's the context which they use, it's the meaning which they use, it's the way behind the motives of which they use. So it's a very interesting story, and it just represents, Johnno, freedom of expression in this country is continuing to be eroded every day.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm just looking through the article myself, and it says here that Mr. Holworth, is how I'm going to pronounce it, he said, get your Josh Frydenberg central planning Jew punching bag. And things like this. Now, if it is the case that people like Karl Marx were themselves Jewish and or funded by Jewish people, if it's the case that the Bolshevik Revolution was carried out by people who were predominantly Jewish, and if it's the case that Jewish people throughout history have had a tendency as a group towards supporting communism, if all of this is true and he's saying it, then how can you say that it's anti-Semitic? And before you can say, oh, well, none of that is true, how can you know until you've done your own research? These aren't the kind of things that are taught in school. Certainly when I was in school, I wasn't taught that the Bolshevik Revolution was carried out by mostly Jewish people. I had no idea about any of this. This is stuff that I've had to learn for myself. I had no idea about who Karl Marx really was and what his motivations were. This stuff isn't taught in school. And so for this character, Mr. Holworth, who I've never heard of prior to reading this article from Lindsay, if it's the case that he's saying, hey, look, Josh Frydenberg is supporting communist policies and that's in line with communists of the past, how can you say that that is anti-Semitic? I mean, we're at the point now where calling someone an anti-Semite, it used to be that people who hated Jews, you called them anti-Semitic. Now we're at the point where it's just people who Jews hate, you call them anti-Semitic. It's a way to shut people up. People have been conditioned to say, oh, I don't want to be anti-Semitic. I won't say anything that can be taken the wrong way. But if you do your own research, you might learn that actually Bolshevism, communism, they do seem to stem from a central common core, and that common core happens to be Jewish. You might like that, you might dislike that, but if that's the reality of the matter, how can you criticise this character Holworth for saying it about Frydenberg, Lindsay?
Yeah, I agree entirely. I pretty much said everything I've got to say in there when I finished up, because I get sick of people who tell lies about Jews. I like to stick to what I consider to be fairly solid ground. That's how I view it. I mean, I've come across people, oh bloody Jew, you know the names they use, whatever. And to me, that's you're just insulting people for no good reason. But if what you're saying is true and you've got research for it, and these are things that they've done, then say them by all means. And then when you've said them, don't buckle under. That's the next point I wanted to make. So there are 2 points there. Be honest and don't buckle under. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. I won't go on any more about it.
No, you're right, mate. Ethan, any final thoughts on this one?
No, just to reiterate what I said and expand on what Lindsay said. I obviously I'm taking away from the actual situation itself, whether he was in the right or wrong. I have to do my own research into that to look at his quotes and see what he said. But I agree completely with Lindsay. You know what I mean? Just calling someone a Jew for the sake of calling a Jew and all of these other names, I don't tolerate. But if you want to, as you said, if you've got history to back it up and whatnot, say what you want to say, mean what you want to say, and then don't buckle under the pressure. And if this is the case with this gentleman, then I support that. But overall, I'm someone who believes in freedom of expression, no matter what it is. And if someone is being attacked for expressing their right to say what they want, then that's the overall issue for me. And I'm completely against those things being eroded, Johnno.
Yeah, fair enough, mate. Well, from the live chat, we've got more than 60 people watching. We appreciate all of you guys for coming out. From the live chat, just a few comments related to the last couple of topics. Justice for Germans says that rich people are my enemy, and I understand where he's coming from. My question to you, Justice, would be, how rich is rich? I mean, I would put to you that somebody who works hard, who's made their way through the corporate system, whatever, someone who's earning 150, yeah, they're probably wealthier than the average person, but are they really rich? I mean, to me, the people who are rich, the wealthy, the elite, the establishment, the authority, to me, these are people who, at least on paper, they're worth, orders of magnitude more than the guy who earns 150 or the woman who earns 150. To me, the people earning 150, 200 a year, yeah, they're wealthier than me, but I don't think they're my enemy. I think they can buy more expensive stuff, but they're on the same level as me. They've got the same enemy as me, whether they realise it or not. So my question to you, Justice, is how rich is rich? I don't really think 150 or 200 is truly rich in the sense that I don't think that they're on the other side, if that makes sense. We'll talk more about that in the after show. Silver Slave says, I'm voting now with my money. And this is a point that I make to people oftentimes is, you get to vote every day. You get to vote every single day that you're alive with how you live, how you spend your money, how you earn your money. And I know a lot of people who like to think that they're awake, that they're aware, they know what's going on, they don't like the system. But these are people who spend 5 days a week at a job they don't like to earn money to then go and spend on stuff they don't need. And they don't seem to realize, well, hold on, all the money you're earning, the government you don't like is taking its cut. And then when you spend that money, the government's taking its cut. And where are you spending the money? Are you really making a positive contribution with how you spend your money? You get to vote every day with how you earn and how you spend. Again, we'll talk about more of that later. Common Law Man says that the government has a constitutional obligation to print money for basic human needs like roads and hospitals, etc. And we gave them back that right years ago. This is another classic topic that we can talk about in the after show. But we do have to move on, guys, to the international segment. It's a nice little segue from the fifth topic of domestic. Lindsay, you've got an article there about a German opera conductor who's being persecuted for his alleged anti-Semitism.
Yeah. This was actually off the Forward website, which is a Jewish website, on the 28th of June. And their headline said, future Berlin Philharmonic conductor hit with anti-Semitism. And I don't think they meant hit, being anti-Semitic. I think they meant that he was subjected to anti-Semitism. So I'll just read the quote. Kirill Petrenko, 43, a Russian-born Jew, was elected chief conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra on June the 21st. Currently director of the Bavarian State Opera in Munich, he will replace conductor Sir Simon Rattle in September 2018. In two commentaries, one from Northern German Radio, NDR, and another in Welt Online, anti-Semitic stereotypes were used to describe the conductor. The offending material has since been removed. Petrenko has refused to give further interviews. The Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung reported. NDR commentator Sabine Lange, Lange, I hope I'm pronouncing these correctly, writing about Petrenko and a German board contender for the position, described the latter, Christian Thielemann, as a world-renowned expert in the German sound, and Petrenko as a mythical dwarf-like figure from Wagner's operas. And in quote again, the tiny gnome, the Jewish caricature. Now, I don't really know very much about Wagner's operas, so I'll have to research that. The Welt Online commentator obliquely noted that while Petrenko and Thielemann were otherwise comparable, it was a relief to many that Petrenko enjoys good interpersonal relations, quote, as at least one of the female opera singers at this year's Bayreuth Wagner Festival can attest. So, sorry, I find that amusing. Readers were quick to point out that anti-Semitic stereotypes of overly competitive, oversexed Jews, and the articles were edited or removed. The Deutsche Wirtschaftsnachrichten, or German Economic News Online, reported, but the fact that no editors had picked up upon these breaches prior to publication were disturbing to many. Now that's the end of the quote, but my comment, the reason I brought all this up was that, is this a genuine rise in anti-Jewish feeling in Germany, or are these just oversensitive Jews seeing anti-Semites under every bed? Because to equate somebody with a dwarf-like figure out of Wagner's opera and then claim that that's anti-Semitic, and then to make some suggestion about this fella having some sort of relationship with one of his opera singers, and then taking that down the line and talking about a general oversexed Jews thing, I found the whole thing a bit sus. But anyway, I'll hand that over to Ethan and see whether, I mean, he's our expert on sex, so we'll see what he's going to say.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have the answer. Again, I would have to look into this more. I don't have an opinion on it either way. But one thing that I do have an opinion on is political correctness destroying society over the last half a century in this country and overseas, and even further beyond that. This political correctness, people trying to discern, trying to analyze whether or not something is offensive to other people, what is offensive to this person and that person, this person. Political correctness has destroyed everything that our languages stand for, that our values have stand for, that our general society has stood for. And I've grown up in a politically correct world. Lindsay, you've seen it descend into the realms that it is today, and this is another perfect example of that. People trying to categorize everything as being offensive and categorizing everything as being something that is offensive. If it is offensive, then there should be code of conduct within the media foundations over there, within the media websites, within the Forward website, within the Northern German Radio to analyze this. There should be code of conduct. It should have nothing to do with personal belief outside of that. There should be guidelines to follow that. So it should be an internal issue, but it's being turned into anti-Semitism, being turned into something that is just continuing to push the rhetoric, Johnno, and that's something that I despise, is that the way the political correctness rather has taken over our society.
Yeah, and if people take the time to look into what political correctness is, like we all know this term, oh, that's not politically correct, but where does that come from? If people take the time to look into this and do the research, they find out about the Frankfurt School, they find out about what the Hitler administration did about the Frankfurt School, they find out about who was behind the Frankfurt School and what we now call cultural Marxism. If they find out about all of this, they'll see that there's a common thread, and that's why I always encourage people to do their own research. There's really so much out there for you to discover, and so many things will make a lot more sense if you take the time to do that research. In the live chat, Lord Rollo says that in regards to the earlier article about Mr. Hogwarth, whatever his name was, bowing down to the pressure, Lord Rollo makes the point that it's hard not to bow down when you've got the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, on your case. And as we all know, they can be very powerful operators, the old Anti-Defamation League, the so-called Anti-Defamation League. It's a very Orwellian term, Anti-Defamation League, but if you criticize the wrong people, they'll do everything they can to defame you and to try to get you fired. We'll talk more about that in the after show. We need to move on to the second topic for international. It is related, though. This is to do with hate speech laws, so-called hate speech laws in the US, trumping their First Amendment rights. Lindsay, take it away.
Okay, thanks for that. It's me again. This came from the Washington Post website. And was on the 4th of June, and it said just that, hate speech prosecution in Montana. And I'll quote, the prosecutor's office in Flathead County, Montana, that's a very unfortunate word, isn't it, Flathead? Anyway, Flathead County, Montana, where Kalispell is located, is arguing that speech that exposes Jews or other religious, racial, or other groups to hatred, contempt, ridicule, degradation, or disgrace is criminally punishable unless it consists of true factual statements. As the Montana criminal defamation statute is worded, this means that hate-inducing opinions are criminally punishable too. Yes, this is that extraordinarily rare thing, an American prosecution for hate speech. And then it got in brackets state versus Lenio. Now, I'm not sure what that means. The First Amendment doesn't allow that. The statute also covers statements about groups, classes, or associations. I think it makes sense to interpret the statute, especially to avoid constitutional problems, as limited to relatively small groups, such as, to give examples from the Restatement of Torts, speaking of civil actions for libel, 4 officers of a corporation, or 25 employees in a particular job category. But the Montana prosecutor disagrees. Statements that injure the reputation of Jews as a class, or presumably Muslims, blacks, gays, men, police officers, law professors, Republicans, or any other such group as a class, the prosecution reasons, are also covered by the statute. Now, this is almost exactly the same comments as we had for the last article, and my comment on this is that the rot is starting to set in. We always thought of this as the land of the free, and they had constitutional right to free speech, but obviously even that is trying to be eroded now. So I'll hand that over to Ethan again and see what he has to say on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay, and thanks for bringing this up. I've mentioned on the show before that I'm trying to get done a documentary about the erosion of global free speech across the world here in the 21st century, and how it has related to previous laws in the past, and how they're going to use hate speech or preachers of hate as a way to paint people that question the system, that question authority, that question the wrong people as extremists or terrorists. And this is a very good point that you've brought up here. And the one thing, is the contradictions. Where does it tie in with the amendments that the US have? Where does the state statute tie into this? But the second thing is, if they want to bring this in, if they're genuine about bringing these sort of things in, where they want to, as you've said, 4 officers of a corporation, 25, and they've disagreed, and that injure the reputation of people. If they want to do that, if they want to bring in something that injures the reputation of people, let's make it consistent. Every single media station in Montana that wants to paint every Muslim as a terrorist, they should fall under this as well. Everyone that paints radical extremists as all of this, if we stereotype people it should be consistent. And you think that there would be consistency if something like this was brought in? I definitely don't think so. You know, it only will be on certain select groups that you criticize, while the rest are to go free. So there's contradictions everywhere with this sort of thing, this sort of move globally to destroy freedom of speech, and that is the contradictions between our already existing rights and the contradictions between the double standards of reporting on one group and not the others. Johnno, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely get what you're saying, and it's why it's so important that we do have outlets to discuss and to express our beliefs and our opinions. And it seems like with every passing week almost right now, there's another story, there's another policy, there's another thing that's there to tell us that we need to have less rights to express ourselves. And you have to wonder who benefits from you, me, and our listeners, and anybody else in Australia or around the world having less rights to express themselves. Who really benefits? For me, that's what it comes back to. Who really benefits from this, from you being allowed to say less about what you really think? We need to press on, and Ethan, the next topic, a very important one, this one, and I know that many of our listeners have been looking forward to this one. The third topic for International is to do with discerning the myths about the Greek referendum. This is your piece. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno. Now, this has been an issue or topic that I've been following closely for a number of years now since the austerity measures started, and seeing as this is the hottest topic of this week for various reasons, I thought I would capitalize on this and speak about some of my own personal thoughts about what is happening in Greece, what I have taken from the media coverage this week, and some of the things that the media isn't telling you about the debt Greek crisis. Now, as always, for some context, Greece has been under a set-to-fail bailout program with the European Commission, the IMF, and the European Central Bank for a number of years now, and this agreement ran out on Tuesday. And as a result, tensions and unrest in the country have risen. And it got to this point when Goldman Sachs just installed their puppet banking masters in Europe to enforce these austerity measures against countries like Greece. And that was only overturned earlier this year when the so-called radical leftist party, as the media like to call them, came to power after they won parliamentary elections on January 25th. They rose to popularity after promising to renegotiate Greece's debt and to put an end to austerity in this country, which is crippling beyond belief. You know, contrary to what some of the fake accounts in the chat may believe, I do have Greek blood flowing through my veins. I know a lot of friends and also family members that are suffering over there, particularly small business owners. So it's refreshing to see them stand up for themselves, but it's also concerning that we have to address some of these issues after they've been just completely overtaken over the past few years. Now, because of the chaos, banks have been shut down all week with limits imposed on cash withdrawals. Tens of thousands of demonstrators have taken to the street, both real protesters and in my estimation, fake ones like we saw in Libya and Syria. And as a result, the country is set to have a referendum on whether they want to continue further austerity or not. Now, I'm not here to speak about the crisis itself, the banking, the money trail, what led to the current situation, etc. But I will leave a couple links at AusRoundtable.com for you to discover many inconsistencies and outright lies associated with the notion that the Greeks are responsible for the mess that they are in. But today, as we try to do on this show, and I want to make it relatable to us that are listening here, I want to talk about what the media isn't broadcasting and how it relates on a global level. So I'll just read out a little piece here. Quote, with Greeks preparing to decide on whether to accept a bailout from the EU and the IMF in a crucial referendum on Sunday, economist Martin Armstrong sensationally claims that the Troika, which is the IMF, the whole collaboration of these central sort of banks, that they are planning to rig the vote. Armstrong quotes the Greek finance minister who accused the EU of forcing Greece to close banks for the sole purpose of blackmailing and getting a yes vote to a non-sustainable solution that would be bad for Europe. Now, Armstrong, who is known for successfully predicting the 1987 Black Monday crash, as well as the 1998 Russian financial collapse, asserts that the EU leaders are desperate to prevent Greece from leaving the euro because it could grease the skids for France taking the same course, etc., etc. Such an eventuality would also bolster the chances of Britain leaving the EU altogether and could push Greece into the arms of Russia or China. The situation is so dire that power brokers may even rig the referendum to get the outcome they want, claims Armstrong. Quote, they refuse to solve the euro crisis because they only see their own self-interest and assume they can force their will upon the people. They are doing everything in their power to rig the Greek referendum to make it appear the Greeks want a yes vote, writes Armstrong. This appears to be their only way of diverting the crisis, with orchestrating a fake yes vote to economic suicide. The Troika will attempt to rig the referendum as they did with the Scottish elections, end quote. Now, Armstrong's claims aren't that outlandish given the derision that the EU leaders had for the very idea of getting a vote in the first place. When it was first discussed last week, the Troika reacted with contempt and disdain to the very notion that Greeks would be given the democratic say in the future of their country, according to the finance minister, who said EU leaders told them that common people shouldn't be expected to understand such complex issues. If Greece votes yes, the Prime Minister will resign and bailout talks will resume with a newly formed government. If the no camp wins, the country is widely expected to exit the euro and begin printing its own currency once again, end quote. So that's to give a context about what I wanted to focus on today. It's that no matter what you think about how Greece got there, what their options are, the main premise is that they are going to a referendum, and very shortly are going to a referendum. It's not far from now. And all week, all we've been hearing about is the government, whether they are incompetent or not, how the austerity is the only option because they got themselves into this mess, the usual nonsense. That's all we've been hearing about. But what we're not hearing about is that the Greek people aren't going to have a free choice because, as Armstrong predicts, they're going to rig the votes because them leaving the euro would destroy this zombie system that they have. Now, we've seen all these demonstrations. They've been ignoring the people's true opinion, and they're not reporting that these measures don't work. They haven't worked, and the fact that they are looking to rig the referendum would just jeopardize the Ponzi scheme. It's madness. Now, before I go into my thoughts about how this reflects globally, I'll break up my voice here because I know people have been listening to me. I'll throw to Lindsay. It seems, unfortunately, Lindsay, that Greece has to bear the burden of this fake economic system, this disaster that we operate under today. But even if there was any real solutions to this problem, such as removing themselves from the Eurozone, which is really their only option if you look at it, it seems even then they are destined to not explore these options due to the corruption of the polls, media manipulations and the likes. I'm interested to get your thoughts on all of this situation happening so far.
Okay, well, one of the main things that I read maybe a fortnight ago was that the Greek government were actually saying we repudiate the debt because certain things were forced on our predecessors which were against our constitution or our people's human rights, etc., etc. Now, the term they used, I can't remember it exactly, but it was an economic term which basically meant repudiate the debt. So they're saying we don't have to pay it back anyway because you forced this on us with ridiculous interest rates and what have you, and you've purposely destroyed us against the rights of our people. Now, I remember that part. Now, I was going to refer to an article, and I won't read the whole article. I'll just summarise. But during the week, Andrew Bolt did an article on, and he called it "All Roads Lead to Athens." But basically, he was saying, look, all the propaganda we've been getting, that the Germans are very hard workers and the Greeks are a pack of bludgers, is not true. And he started trotting out and saying, well, look, the Greek workers actually put in, on average, 42 hours a week, where the Germans put in 35. Now, he's saying, well, and we admit that a lot of the Greeks are actually sitting in a shop till midnight or something like that. They're not building Mercedes-Benzes. So there's a difference there. But basically he said they're not a pack of bludgers. They've been doing the right thing. And then he went on to blame the whole system on sort of demographics, a bit like the Harry Dent thing, where the number of children we're bearing isn't enough to maintain our society, and it'll be like Japan. The economy just has to stagnate because you haven't got any children coming through who are in 20 years going to get married and have more children. You know how the system works. So that was his answer to all this, and his warning was, yeah, Australia better be careful because we're heading on the same road. We're down to 1.8 children per couple instead of 2.1, which is the maintenance level. And so you had all this going on behind the scenes. Now, I can see his point, but what got me was that nowhere in that did he mention anything about banks and taking interest rates or any of this into it, and what that would do to these people. Now, somebody else in the chat made the point that the people didn't get the benefits of this. It was given to the loans were given to the government, not to the people, and it's a bit like we have in Australia, the same thing. So I've got real mixed feelings about this. I suspect that this repudiation thing may have legs, and may affect the whole world. And I understand the point you're making about Europe. They're worried that this whole European thing will fall apart if too many other countries see what Greece does and follows it. I think we've already got Hungary have already printing their own money, and we've got Iceland. So they can't let too many get out of the yard. It's like sheep jumping over the fence. They can't let too many, or it'll be like Germany, and everybody will be looking at them saying, look, they're doing really well now. No, that's about all I can say on it. I'm not sure that I've got all the inside information. So, my opinions are probably just based on what I've been able to etch out from a few different sites, and it might not all be correct. But I'll give that back to you now, Ethan. See what you've got to comment about that.
Yeah, you make some good points there, Lindsay, and that's the exact same thing. That's what I was trying to point out here, just to go back and add some context, was that it doesn't matter what you think about Greece, how they got into the predicament. We all know what they're not reporting is the Goldman Sachs puppets came in, that the people got none of the benefits. It was all a complete sham through this fake zombie economic system. But we all know how that came to be. But regardless of whether you agree or not, if you do, even the mainstream courses, you can take courses on understanding the Greek financial crisis. I took the course and I got a certificate. It was just something that I wanted to do online, just to see what they were regurgitating. But even they say really the only option is to get out of the euro, because the austerity measures are going to work good for the short term, and then the long term it's going to be worse. If you get out, it's still going to be as bad, but then there's a whole bunch of things that can happen. But the main premise of what I wanted to bring up today was that they're going to a referendum to decide this, but there's no way that they're going to be allowed to exit the Eurozone, in my opinion, because that jeopardizes this zombie system that they have. If the Greeks can withdraw and the rest of the countries can find a way to withdraw from this, we mentioned that the EU has started to do the quantitative easing measures. They've started to incorporate the whole US Ponzi scheme into it. The problem here is that the Greeks aren't going to be allowed to withdraw, because, as is being predicted, they're going to rig the referendum just as they did with the Scottish independence vote. And that was the main premise today, regardless of what anyone wants to think. And back to how I wanted to relate this, we are seeing how this can work now, how the media and government establishment can manipulate the rest of the masses into believing the people themselves are responsible for something that has happened by design. The justification of over half your wages being taken, bank accounts closed, credit control at unprecedented levels. This is showing us what is coming. And I mean, this is a pretext, in my estimation, for what is inevitably to transcend to the rest of the world. And I don't mean through an economic collapse or something like that. I mean through weakening our zombie economies, introducing austerity, destroying what's left of the middle class, and then blaming us for it, as we're sort of seeing in the Western world, but it's starting to get here. And it's entirely plausible to see that this is a plan that they have for a global system. When they decide, after they've got us completely dependent on the system, that's when they'll pull something like this. So we need to identify right now what is going on and try to get this information out to the masses, Johnno, because if they can pull this off in Greece, if they can pull off this austerity measures and this whole farce and blame the people for it and make the rest of the world believe that the people are to blame for it, that sets a precedent for what they can do other places. Do you agree?
Yeah, and in the live chat, we've got about 70 people, and there are so many commenters who are making insightful comments. I know that many of our listeners have to listen on delay. They listen on MP3 later on. I fully understand some people can't listen live, but if you can listen live, I highly recommend it, because the live chat section is full of interesting conversations. Gary McAntanis says that he gets the feeling that they are using Greece as a test case to see if this is an effective way of robbing countries of their sovereignty, we will be next. And I've made this point before. The only reason why the Australian Ponzi scheme keeps going is because of mass immigration. We're importing something like 200,000 people per year net. The vast majority of those go into our 5 major cities. So you have an increased demand for housing. So the housing stock prices continue to rise. That's just how it is. The government could very easily shut off the immigration tap, very easily, and I'm using the word government loosely here, and they'd actually have mass support for it. The vast majority of Australians, including immigrants, don't like the mass immigration that's taking place. That's why we don't get to vote on it, because most people are against it. But they could very easily reduce mass immigration, and all of a sudden, our very highly leveraged banks would find themselves in a negative balance. I mean, they'd be bankrupt almost overnight. And I'll talk more about this in the after show. But the point here is that if people are saying that they're using Greece as a test case to take away their sovereignty, well, this ties into the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other things. You better believe they're trying to take away our national sovereignty. They don't want us as people to have the right, or to even believe in our minds that we have the right to say how we think we should be governed, which is what the whole globalist United Nations one world government, if you want to call it that agenda, is all about. Taking away the rights of us as people to determine what's happening on our lands. And in Greece right now, people, I mean, what's happening right now, I mean, you've been following this one closer than I have, Ethan. Is it the case that people right now are being limited to how much money they can take out of their own banks?
Yeah, it's $60 limit that they, it's $60 is the max limit you can take out per day.
Yeah, and I've been criticised for not spending enough time talking about this, the Greek financial crisis, and I fully understand those criticisms. They're fair enough. The reason why I don't spend more of my time looking into this is because, for me, it comes back to first principles. This is all fake money to start off with. It's not backed by anything. It's completely make-believe. So if there's a financial crisis, there are people who control the underlying mechanisms to lead to the crisis. Like there are people out there who seem to think that none of this was planned or foreseen. You better believe this was planned and foreseen. All we're seeing right now is sort of some of the ripples through the system that were always going to happen. I believe it's their plan. They're going to use their monetary system, their financial systems, for complete enslavement. And you could argue they've already achieved that. So if I don't spend much time looking at Greece specifically, or Italy, or Spain, or Portugal specifically, like the 4 countries who are in the most trouble in Europe at the moment, it's not because I don't think this is important. It's because I believe that the end game has already been revealed to us, and all we're seeing right now is the final act of the play taking place. Ethan, do you get where I'm coming from with this?
Oh, absolutely, Johnno, and that's what I tried to say at the start of the article. It was completely done by design. They did this by design with Goldman Sachs bankers. They're doing this by design now by not, even if it is a fake system, the fake system needs to go around, and they're not going to allow Greece to leave the Eurozone because they're going to rig the referendum. It's all a farce. They need their zombie system to continue to keep going. So I get, for me, I take the approach as I want to identify the pieces of the puzzle, because if we can smash one of the pieces of the puzzle can't be complete, rather than we also focus on the main agenda, but I like to focus on these things. But I completely get where you're coming from as well, Johnno. This is a building block, and as I said, this sets a precedent for what's coming to other countries and the way that they're going to manipulate us into believing that we're the problem for it, when that's not the case at all.
No, and if you have a monetary system that isn't backed by anything, and one group of people get to control the monetary system, and suddenly there's a crisis in one country, do you really think that this wasn't foreseen, or that it's not under control? The people who run the show know exactly what they're doing, and again, I strongly encourage people to do their own research into what happened in Germany following World War I. They were bankrupted. The Treaty of Versailles was terrible for the Germans. They were in a lot of trouble. One administration came to power. They started using money, and money is at the heart of an economy. Like, whether money is good or bad, whether it's backed by something or it's not, it's at the heart of the economy, because that is what is used to transfer goods as a store of value, all the rest of it, right? So they took their monetary system and used it to benefit the people. And what happened? Germany went from a basket case to almost powerful enough to take on the rest of Europe and win. Now, you can say whatever else you like about the Hitler administration. You can believe all of Hollywood's stories about the Hitler administration, all the things they did, if you want to. That's up to you. But what nobody denies is the fact that they took their monetary system and they used it to benefit the people. And we in this country and our listeners in other countries, your countries could do the exact same thing. And there's one very simple reason why they don't. It's because your government doesn't exist to help you. You live in a conquered nation and you've been conquered through the financial system. Simple as that. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. When you were saying before, it's one of these things that sort of constantly irritates me, is that even though it's not backed by anything, it's still our labour that, you know, you work labour and you get these pieces of plastic or whatever, or digits in the bank assigned to us. Whereas what you were saying is but there are this other group that can just make them up out of nothing. They don't have to put in their sweat and toil. And I think that's the difficulty I have with this. It does, the money in the bank does have some value because we sweated for it. Whereas these people just make it up whenever they want it and manufacture it in trillions. And it makes the system so unfair. So yes, my own feeling is that the whole thing's got to come down eventually. But when and what, I don't know. So anyway, that's enough for me. I'll give it back to you, Johnno.
But that's the whole point, Lindsay, is that, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, as far as humans go, there's nothing more parasitic than usury, than lending people money and expecting more than what you lend them back in return, because they've got to get that money from somewhere. And if you've got a monopoly on the money, then they're just getting that money off someone else who you lent the money to in the first place. And this isn't conspiracy theory. This isn't out there thought. This is accounting 101. All of the money that we have today is debt-based, and there are people making money off the debt. Australia today is paying something like $1 billion with a B, $1 billion per month, rather, in interest repayments simply from borrowing money from the bond market. And if you go through the education institutions, they'll teach you that this is how it has to be. But it doesn't have to be this way. In fact, this is an absurd way to be. Why do we have to give other people money for the benefit of borrowing it from them? Why are we borrowing money in the first place? And of course, when we pay them back interest, what are they doing with that money? Well, they're buying our goods and services. In other words, we're working for them. We're giving up our labour and our goods, the minerals from our ground and other things, for the privilege of borrowing their money. And why are we borrowing their money? Because we have to, because we are a conquered nation. It's as simple as that, Ethan.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better, Johnno. And as a final thought, I guess to wrap it up, to bring it all back around, I got a quote here from Hereward Fenton from Truth News Radio Australia, truthnews.com.au. He said, in regards to the Greek financial crisis, I hate to be cynical, but I have to state the obvious and note that the Greek referendum is a farce and a sham, which is only serving to perpetuate the false paradigm of left versus right. As with all such fake democratic maneuvers, the polls indicate a 50-50 split, so it will go down to the wire, and as we all know, the wire will be rigged. Neither the left or right has the answers, but the people on the street are not left or right. It's not their fault, nor is it the fault of the wicked banksters. It's our fault. All of us in the West are responsible because we collaborated with a corrupt and depraved oligarchy and agreed to a life of voluntary servitude in order to gain certain benefits. We should all be rebelling now, not just the Greeks. And I think that's a very powerful observation to end it on. You know, I like to think that I do rebel against the system by simply reporting what really matters and overcoming the spin of the mainstream media. And this is why shows like this are so important, because we have the opportunity to do just that as we have today. So I'll leave links at ausroundtable.com for you to find out everything you need to know about the Greek financial crisis and how much of a farce that it is, and for everyone to check out for themselves. And we'll be back here next week to discuss the results, Johnno.
Very good stuff, mate. Well, we need to press on because we're coming towards the end of the show. The fourth topic for International is to do with California in the US passing a controversial vaccine bill. Ethan, tell us more.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno. And I'll make it quick. I know that we're running out of time here, but in a week packed full of important news, as we just discussed, this is one that really stuck out to me in relation to what we have been and are set to in the future experience here at home. Now, to give a quick background to listeners at home, especially our Australian audience who may not follow international affairs as closely as they would like, for a number of months now, parts of the United States and most importantly California have been debating a number of controversial legislative pieces that would tighten the exemption avenues associated with vaccines. All of this week, and it's not a surprise, you know, we know where we stand with this issue, so it's not a surprise that this is a disappointment to myself personally here on the panel. California did pass into law Bill SB 227 that removes exemptions to vaccine requirements for school entry, except those medically indicated as through a medical exemption process, which I'll get into in a minute. But in the meantime, let me read out an article here by Forbes from the 30th of June entitled California Vaccination Bill SB 227 signed by Governor becomes law. Quote, a California bill that removes all exemptions to vaccine requirements for school entry, except those medically indicated, has just become law. After the California Assembly passed SB 227 on Thursday and the state Senate passed the same version on Monday, Governor Jerry Brown signed the bill into law this morning. Quote, the science is clear that vaccines dramatically protect children against a number of infectious and dangerous diseases, Brown wrote in his signing message. While it's true that no medical intervention is without risk, the evidence shows that immunization powerfully benefits and protects the community. Brown acknowledged the significance, and he acknowledged the significance of this and dismissed the opposition, including comparing people that oppose this to Nazi Germany, and the controversy that has surrounded the bill since its inception inspired the outbreaks of measles that began in Disneyland last winter. But he points out that any child with a medical certificate to receiving a vaccine can still receive an exemption to attend daycare or school. Quote, while requiring that school children be vaccinated, he wrote, SB 227 explicitly provides an exemption when a physician believes that circumstances in the judgment and sound discretion of the physician so warrant. The law applies to students attending any public or private school in the state, so parents who choose to not vaccinate their children for non-medical reasons would need to homeschool their children. The only other states with similar immunizations policies that do not allow any non-medical exemptions are Mississippi and West Virginia. We are thrilled that today the governor signed SB 227 and committed California to a future that is safer for all our children, said Lee Rusin, a parent and co-founder of Vaccinate California, a sponsor of the bill. The elimination of the personal belief exemption will raise vaccination rates in our state and protect our community from protect our communities from unvaccinated children, end quote. And then the article just goes on to regurgitate the same old medical confidence in vaccines, etc., etc. Now, the reason I brought this up is because it relates to here at home. We are currently in the process of discussing and introducing legislation that will remove all forms of exemption, including on religious grounds, which will take away from family tax benefits. It's a form of medical cohesion here in this country. And on many levels, ours is much worse, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that state-enforced medical tyranny is spreading all over the world right now. And I'll throw it to Lindsay first. These new developments are really just a confirmation of what we've discussed on the show for a long time, and that is this mandatory vaccine topic, if you will, isn't just exclusive here in Australia. It's a global move. And when anything is introduced globally like this, there can't be a positive agenda behind it. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah, I agree with you. And when you were reading that out, I was thinking at the time, when you said about, well, if you don't want to knuckle under, you have to homeschool your kids. And I thought they're in a bit of a conundrum there because, as we've talked about with the Communist Manifesto, one of the big things there was to have the public schooling for all children so they can be all brainwashed. So what they're in a bind. They want you to vaccinate your kids, but if you don't want to do that, you're going to homeschool them. Then we've lost them. Anything can happen to your kids once they're not in school. So I can see where that they're going to have to rethink all this. So that's probably why they're going to try and get rid of any exemptions, because they certainly don't want to lose the kids out of school. It's not just the vaccines. That's the other thing that gets me. When they were talking about it, how it's accepted medical evidence. It's a done deal now that it's good for everybody. It's almost what they say about fluoride. It's all these things. We're going to force you to have this, and if you wanted any more evidence that you're cattle, that's exactly what we do to cattle. We shove this thing down and drench them, shove it down their throat and drench them, whether they like it or not. And that's exactly what they're doing to us. and to me it's so obvious. We are cattle, we are slaves. They will do what they damn well like until such time as it's a bit like a farmer being hit with a ram. Suddenly the ram gets sick of this and bang, he rolls the farmer. And I think it's about time we started ramming a few of these people. Anyway, I'll leave that and see what Johnno's got to say about it.
Look, what I'll do is in the after show, because when you're screen sharing or you're playing audio, it can be a bit difficult, and we try to not have any of those technical issues during the proper show. But in the after show, I'll play a clip of Bill Gates openly stating that the mass vaccination that his foundations are helping fund in Africa will reduce the population. He openly states that. And then I can show this to people and I can say, hey, look, this is Bill Gates openly stating that his vaccination program in Africa will reduce the population. What do you think about this? And again, for the average sleeple, they've got no way to comprehend this information. They've got no way to interpret it. They've got no way to synthesize their own thoughts. They can't handle it. But I can show you, and I will show you guys in the after show, footage of Bill Gates stating that population will reduce, will go down with their mass vaccination program. Now, of course, that's not to say that the vaccinations themselves are directly going to kill people, and that's not to say that it's necessarily the case that the whole point of this vaccination agenda is to reduce the population. These are other things that we can talk about later. But if you've got Bill Gates, this great philanthropist who gives money to these charities supposedly to help the people in Africa, openly stating that this will reduce the population, that should at least make you question what the overall agenda is, Ethan.
Yeah, certainly, Johnno, and it goes back to the original thing of free choice, and that's the positive to take out of this is that Californians have taken up, they've marched to city town hall steps, they're all across the state in California protesting against this, trying to get it repealed, trying to get it out of the parliament. Tens of thousands of people are standing up to this, and as we saw it 2 weeks ago at the rally here in Brisbane against compulsory vaccinations, it's not just people that oppose vaccines. There are people there that are pro-vaccine, that they do vaccinate their kids. They believe that it's the right choice. There are people there that don't have kids. There are people there that do have kids. There are people that don't believe in it at all. But the overarching issue to take away from this is freedom of choice. And if I've said it so many times on this show, what precedent does it set if a government can enforce medical state tyranny on something as fundamental as your human health with a child that you have? What precedent does that set? And that's what this issue is about. And as I've said, it's not just here in Australia, because as we've just seen in California, it's taking off on a global level. And when something takes off on a global level, there's not a good agenda behind it, Johnno.
Yeah, and I've said to people in my life, I mean, we do this show, we do some videos online, we have an online presence, but we have our own lives just like all of our listeners. And in my regular life, if you want to call it that, I've had someone close to me recently refer to me as an anti-vaxxer. Now, I don't consider myself an anti-vaxxer. If you're a parent and you want to stick chemicals into your kid because you think it'll help your kid, I think you should have the right to do that. If we live in a world where you've got the right to cut off its foreskin, then you should have the right to stick chemicals into it if you think that it's going to help the kid. The point that I make is, if another parent says, I don't want these chemicals in my kid, then as the parent, that should be their right. So I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm pro-choice. I'm pro you make your own decision for what you think is best for your kid. And the problem that we've got here in Australia, Ethan, and it looks like it's going to happen in California as well, is that choice is going to be taken away. And if you let the state decide which chemicals get injected into your kid from the moment that it's born, then the state has complete and utter control over that kid's life. And what kind of a deluded moron would let the government decide what chemicals have to be stuck into every kid from the moment they're born? It is utter madness, and the only reason they get away with it is because they control the mainstream media, and the mainstream media controls the minds of the masses, Ethan. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's right, Johnno, and that's why I brought this up, because it does set a precedent for what's coming here in January in Australia. This is law in California right now. Law in California right now. It's not even as bad as we have. They still can have medical exemptions. Over here, we're going to have no exemptions whatsoever, not even on religious grounds, to do this. And this is for their school, this is for them entering into school. Over here, we're having our family tax benefits, our livelihoods taken away from people like this, and that's not to take away from the severity of the California bill that's now in law, because it is extremely bad. And you summed it up right, Johnno. We need to fight against this. It's about pushing the notions of freedom of choice and freedom of expression to do what you want. You know what I mean? Whether you're pro or against vaccinations, it's about freedom of choice. And hopefully we can get the word out and try to get this notion across to people before it spreads to other states in the US, before it comes here to Australia. We need to stop this dead in its tracks, because it's only the beginning, it's only the precedent, and more is to come after that, and that's not a good thing.
No, and Lord Rollo in the live chat makes a very amusing comment. I'll write that one down and repeat it in the after show, but we try and keep this show relatively PG, Lord Rollo, so we'll keep that to ourselves. But again, I recommend, we've got 70 people watching live. I appreciate you guys coming out, and if you can't listen live, do your best to jump into the live chat one day, because it is full of insightful and comical comments. Thank you, Lord Rollo. We have to move on to the fifth and final topic. It's a nice little segue, and this is to do with Denmark vaccination fallout. Lindsay, take it away.
Okay, thanks for that. This was from a SOTT.net website on the 23rd of June, and the headline said, Denmark experiences avalanche of girls seeking treatment after HPV vaccinations. And we've discussed this on previous, the matter of the HPV vaccinations on previous episodes, but this one was quite interesting coming out of Denmark. So I'll just quote. In March 2015, a Danish national television station, TV2, aired a documentary focusing on girls who suspected they had been injured by the HPV vaccine Gardasil. Immediately after the airing of the show, girls with similar experiences started coming out of the woodwork. Virtually all of the girls had the same story to tell. They began to have serious new medical conditions shortly after using Gardasil. So they would go to the doctor. According to Louise Julund, the vast majority of doctors would tell them that the HPV vaccine has no serious side effects and offer psychological problems as an alternative reason for the new symptoms. Now, that's the end of the quote. We've seen all this before, and I think it's high time that this so-called profession began to take some responsibility for the damage they're causing. This is very similar. I don't want to bring up my mother again, but it's very similar to what I found. You complain about something, you have a vaccine on one day, the next day you have very bad symptoms, and they'll deny it. Anything. You got flu. No, it wasn't that. It was something. It's anything but the vaccination. And obviously they're being taken to school, or there's something's going on, because they all react that way. Whether it be the women on the front counter at the doctor's surgery, the doctor, nurses, ambulance officers, the whole lot of them. They immediately freak out and say, no, it's not the vaccine. It'll be something else. It's just your problem. You just don't understand. Because you're not trained, you don't realise. You've overlooked something. And then, as this one here says, now they're starting to shunt them off to psychological. Oh no, it's psychological. Go and see a counsellor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And once again, that's straight out of the Communist Manifesto too. That was the whole idea of that, was to shove people off onto psychological problems. So there's nothing really wrong with society. It's your psychological imbalance that's causing this, and that's how I view this. So anyway, I'll give that to you, Ethan, because it really does follow straight on from what you've just talked about with California.
Yeah, it does, Lindsay. It's a herd mentality for a flawed herd immunity system that they have going, and manipulate the people into believing. And it's ironic how it's Gardasil that's being brought up, and that's the exact same vaccine that Tony Abbott, as health minister in 2006, said that he refuses to have his daughters vaccinated with. So it's interesting to make the connections there, and I'll leave the links at AusRoundtable.com for you to see Tony Abbott and his remarks in relation to that particular vaccine. But here it is again, Lindsay, and you're absolutely right. And we spoke about this on episode 30 of the Australian Roundtable Podcast in depth with Lisa on the Sunshine Coast up there. We spoke for the first 90 minutes about the dangers of vaccines, and the main danger is the medical establishment and their mentality, and this mentality of believing in science, believing into these scientific peer-reviewed studies that are peer-reviewed in the first place, and that aren't concrete proof to show something, because there are others that can refute that these are just hypotheses that have been normalized into society. And this case is a perfect example. If you've got something wrong, if you question the vaccines, psychological. If you're against all of these things, psychological, or you're a racist, there's all these ways that they have constructed to get around it, because, Johnno, they don't want to confront the truth. And the truth here is that there are a lot of questions to be concerned regarding this, and none of them are being answered.
Well, I mean, we've got a story here, Ethan, directly straight from Denmark, talking about the fallout of vaccinations. And if the mainstream media was here to inform you and to help us understand the different sides of different debates and to leave us to make our own decision, more people would know about this. But how many people in Australia do you think have any idea of what's taking place in Denmark, as we've discussed today? I would put to you that it would be a tiny little fraction, and that fraction would be the people who investigate this stuff themselves, because they've already woken up to the dangers of vaccinations. And for me, this vaccination thing, it's almost like a good little way to get people to see, hold on, you're only being shown one side of this so-called debate. You're being told that children should be given these vaccinations, that they're good for them, and anyone who says otherwise is crazy. They're a crazy anti-vaxxer. You're being indoctrinated. The mainstream media is literally indoctrinating you. They're giving you a doctrine, they're telling you to believe it, and they're also mocking those who don't, to make you believe that you need to believe it as well, otherwise you'll be mocked as well. It's as simple as that. It's indoctrination, and I think this whole massive push for vaccination, yes, in a way it seems bad for us because they're succeeding for the most part. Most people go along with this agenda. But I think in another way, more people are starting to realize, hold on a second, you're forcing me to believe something, and you're not really giving that much evidence for it. I'll look into it myself, and if they can push even just a small handful of people into saying, you know what, I'll do my own research, good, because those people will eventually end up questioning other things as well, Ethan.
Exactly right, Johnno, and that's why shows like this are so important, because we have to get past the spin and the deception of these agendas that are at hand, and try to at least provoke discussion amongst ourselves, amongst our communities. That's the best thing that you can do, is to recommend the show to people, recommend a platform, start your own platforms, discuss with neighbors, try to get these notions, especially with this topic of freedom, of freedom of choice, of all of these things through to the neighbors, because it's only at a grassroots level that we're going to able to get past the spin and the deception. So that's why shows like this are so important, and I thank everyone for tuning in and listening to the information that we have to put out there, Johnno.
Yeah, exactly right, mate. Well, it makes a nice little segue into our final thoughts section. These are 2-hour shows, of course. If you're listening live, stay tuned, because as soon as we finish the official show, we go straight to the after show, and we've got plenty of interesting stuff to talk about there. But for the official show, it's time to wrap it up for episode 39 on the 5th of July 2015. So we'll throw it to you there, Lindsay. Any final thoughts for today?
My final thought, I agree with what Ethan's just saying. It becomes more and more important that we get more people to, not just this show, to listen to this show, but to start transmitting this message to those people in their own circles. It's becoming more and more important by the day. And I think what brought it home to me was this preparing for this show, there were just so many really important articles that I felt that I just couldn't fit in. We had to leave out. And it just seems like the whole pace is that the people who control things are really stepping up the pace now. And unless we organise some sort of coordinated resistance, we really are going to be swept underneath the steamroller. And I don't want to start feeling negative about it, because I think we can do something positive. I think this show is doing something positive about it. But I would like to see more people, exactly as you're saying, starting their own show, or starting, as Johnno has put it a few times, just actually speaking to people in public at the local shop or wherever you are, and just trying to get this very slow message out. Anyway, I won't say any more about that, but it really is starting to worry me a little bit that the pressure is on. I think they really are leaning on us now. So having said that, I'll give that back to Johnno.
Oh, good stuff, mate. Ethan, episode 39, final thoughts.
Not too much to expand on from what Lindsay said. Just to thank everyone for tuning in every week. We've still got over 70 listeners right now tuned in. Thanks to all the new listeners that have tuned in today, because I know there was a couple that have come through from certain avenues. And as always, please spread the word. Please head to AusRoundtable.com, AUSRoundtable.com, where we leave all the links to everything that you can research for yourself, you can share for yourself, and really try to get this message out, Johnno.
Yeah, good stuff, mate. Well, let me read out a few comments from our website, AusRoundtable.com. That's AUSRoundtable.com, where you can leave comments. You don't need to leave an email. Comments welcome from everybody, and I generally get around to approving or putting it in the bin every couple of weeks. We get so many spam comments, it's not funny. But anyway, let me read out a couple too. Doubting Thomas on June 18 says, thank you for the show. You need to stress in the show that it is on AusRoundtable.com, AUS, and not OZ. I went to the latter site thinking it was here, eagerly signed up for the discussion forum, and then still waiting for a response. Perhaps they are fishing there, or perhaps it's been abandoned. Anyway, it revealed nothing in the process. So thank you, Doubting Thomas. I've taken your constructive criticism on board, and I now try to stress that it's AUSRoundtable.com. We appreciate that. Pavlos on June 21 says, just wanted to say I'm a new listener. I'm very impressed by the level of knowledge and the professional presentation, even more so as I listen to more of your archives and discover that you guys aren't afraid to speak up against the whole truth regarding ruling classes, and especially about those whose names shall not be spoken, even with the threat of prosecution for being an anti-Semite. Thank you, Pavlos, for the comment. Yeah, we don't shy away from talking about things, and we do live in a country where we can be prosecuted for talking about certain things, and most of our listeners are terrific, and their feedback is always wonderful. There are one or two people who have question marks over me, John LeBon. They say that maybe I'm talking about the wrong things, but I live in a country where for talking about the things that I talk about, I can in theory be imprisoned. And the people making certain comments about us, I'd like to see them address some of the topics that we address, because I've listened to them for a long time, and many of them refuse to talk about the people who won't be spoken. Brad on July 3 says, hi guys, I look forward to listening to the Roundtable every week, and it's really good to hear from some guys close to my home on the Gold Coast. Well, Brad, if you're listening today, bear in mind you can come and join us. We do Sunday sessions every now and then, and we'd love to have you on board. You can come and meet me, Ethan, and Lindsay never really makes it across to the studio, but you can meet me and Ethan, have a few beers. That's what I'll be doing in a moment, which leads me to wrapping up the show. We do have to wrap it up right now. I want to thank everyone for tuning in live. One more point, I got an email during the week. We got an email, Ethan. I'm not sure if you saw it actually, but we got an email from a listener during the week who did send us an email some weeks ago, which we still haven't responded to, and I apologized. And I've said this before, I apologize to those of you who've sent us correspondence that we haven't got back to. I've got my own YouTube channel. Ethan has his own YouTube channel, and Lindsay has his own affairs that he has to tend to as well. He cares for his mother. So we're all busy people. This isn't our full-time job. We've got other things we need to do. We can't always reply to you straight away. We do appreciate all of the positive feedback. We appreciate the comments. It means so much to me to read a nice email, but we can't always get back to you straight away. And I do apologize for that, not just for myself, but on behalf of all of us. We can't always get back to you straight away, and I do apologize if you take that personally. Please don't take it personally. You mean a lot to us. And to the listener who wrote us during the week saying that he was disgruntled because we hadn't replied for a while, I'm genuinely sorry. I promise we'll get back to you soon. It's not because we're being lazy, and it's not because we don't like you. We're just people. We're just regular people like you. We've got other things that we need to do as well, and we try to get back to you as soon as we can. We have to wrap it up for episode 39 on the 5th of July 2015. Thank you so much for listening, whether you're listening live or via MP3 later on. Of course, MP3s are available to download for free from our website, AusRoundtable.com. That's AUSRoundtable.com. Go through the back catalogue, go through the archives. There's plenty of good stuff in there, if I do say so myself, and I do say so myself. Go and check it out. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you at 3 p.m. Brisbane time next week.